Namaste and welcome back to a new episode of the Awaara Musaafir show. In today's episode, I'm talking with Miss Kamini Dandapani, who is the author of this book, Rajaraja Chola, King of Kings. This episode is very important if you look at Indian history from a larger perspective. Now, you might be thinking, why is this important? Why is Rajaraja Chola or the Chola Empire important? Why do we need to know about him and his empire? Well, I'll answer your question with a question. Think about your school days. Do you remember those days when you used to read history in school textbooks? Do you remember reading about Chola Empire? Do you remember reading about Rajaraja Chola and Rajendra Chola? If yes, how much? Because I clearly remember from my school days, I had somewhere around 2 or 3 paragraphs, that's it, about the Chola Empire. Well, the Chola Empire is not something you can take lightly. This was one of the greatest empire ancient India has ever seen, especially this one man, this one king, the king of kings, especially Rajaraja Chola. Rajaraja Chola was not just a normal king, he was one of the greatest emperors ancient India had ever seen. He was a temple builder, a conqueror, and a fierce warrior. Rajaraja Chola, who was born as Arulmozi Varman, ruled for approximately 20 years. When he died in 1014 AD, he was beyond dispute the Lord Paramount of the southern India. Just to give you a brief example of what Rajaraja Chola's territory looked like, here's what he conquered. His empire included the modern day Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Kerala, Sri Lanka, Andhra Pradesh, and Orissa. In this episode, you will get to know about the greatness of Rajaraja Chola. You'll also get to know why this huge legend was forgotten from the Indian textbooks. I also asked Miss Kamini Dandapani about the recent controversy that happened when the Poniyin Selvan film came out. And she had a very interesting perspective on that. So don't miss out on that. You'll also get to hear her perspective about why this legend was forgotten from the Indian textbooks. This is a very interesting episode, a very short episode as well. So make sure to watch till the end. Welcome, Kamini ji. Welcome on the Awaara Musaafir show. It's a huge honor for me to have you here and to tell the audience what we are talking about today. We are talking about this book and the subject of this book, which is Rajaraja Chola, King of Kings. Ma'am, firstly, welcome on the show.
Thank you very much, Jay. I'm really honored and happy that you invited me to be a part of your show. So thank you.
Yeah. It was like we were planning this episode and we had to cancel it 2 times, and then finally we are doing this, and I'm so excited to have this conversation. Ma'am, whenever I talk to some historian or someone who has written books about historical figures, to say, I usually start the conversation by asking them, how do you define your subject? So, like, since your subject is Rajaraja Chola, and you have also talked about the kings who were before him, and then you also talk about Rajendra Chola. So, how do you define Rajaraja Chola in few words? Like, because when I read the book, it was like, why was this man not in our history textbooks in school? I literally had that thought so many times. So, please, ma'am, can you
Yes,
define
I
him?
mean, that's a huge reason why I wrote the book. Well, no great king stands alone. So Rajaraja, the Chola dynasty was a great dynasty that it was part of southern India,
Yeah.
over 1,000 years ago. And it was really amazing across many spheres. It was not merely a dynasty that was formed on, military conquest, but it excelled
Right.
in so many other areas like, the religious area, trade, organization, and just generally across many areas. So, in that dynasty, the king that stood out the most, who kind of really took it to its peak, was Rajaraja Chola. And of course, in writing a biography of Rajaraja, you can't just isolate the man, you need to put
Yeah.
him in his context. So, I felt I had to tell the whole story, and then he would stand out in amidst his own history. So that's the reason
Right.
why I chose to write everything and not just about Rajaraja.
Right. Ma'am, when I was reading about Rajaraja Chola and then I did some more research. So, in the North India, at the same time, Rashtrakutas, Pratiharas, and Palas were struggling for Kannauj. And at the same time, in the South, there was, I think so, Pandyas, Pallavas, and one more, I forget. But why do you think, such a huge dynasty who have the people in the Chola Empire, they have ruled for so long? Why were they forgotten in Indian history? I mean, when I look back at my history textbooks from my school, There's, I think so. I clearly remember this. There was one paragraph for Cholas, one paragraph for Pandyas, and one paragraph for some other kingdom. So why do you think this happened?
I wish I had an answer. Like we are from two different generations, so clearly things have not changed
Yeah,
since my school days and your school days. I don't have an answer. So, for instance, my history books covered Mauryas, Guptas, and then Mughals,
same.
and then British India, and
Yeah,
that was it. Whoever designed the books was probably a very North India centric viewpoint, and I'm the last one to say that one history is more important or one is superior or inferior, nothing like that. As a country, we have such a diversity of histories, so many amazing things happening everywhere. So it's not just the south, so the west, the east, all over. We need to bring that diversity to the fore and have many more people become aware, and as a nation I think it will kind of foster a kind of understanding of what we are one
yeah,
country after all with many histories, so we
yeah,
need to bring that. Why it happened, I don't have an answer. I wish I did, but I'm glad there are a lot of histories of regional histories that are being written, and one should not think of them as regional and local,
yeah.
but they are a part of the bigger whole. So
Right. In fact, ma'am, like you have written in the book, I remember you have mentioned it somewhere that even in I think so, Ashokan edicts, there's a mention of early Cholas,
yes,
right?
yes. So
So,
even in those days, it was, we think of globalization and internationalization as new phenomena.
yeah,
No, the ancient world was very interconnected, very aware. So yes, the Ashoka Empire, Ashoka's lands, empires kind of lapped borders with those of the Cholas, and they've mentioned, the Cholas in their edicts. So there was an awareness of a world beyond your own immediate borders. People were
right.
always trying to explore, and that's human nature. So
Hmm.
yes, so awareness was there.
Yeah.
Even Ashoka was aware of the Chola, so why shouldn't we be? So
Yeah. Ma'am, when before we, continue this conversation, there will be a lot of people who are not very well aware with the Indian history. There might be people who won't even know who the Cholas were. So can you, for their benefit, like, mention ki, I mean, how long did the Cholas rule, and how many years it has been since then? So can you just give them a brief answer for
yes.
that?
Yes, of course. So the Cholas actually are slightly unusual in that they had like two periods of
Right.
kind of ruling, and so there's a group of Cholas called the Sangam Cholas who were there between about 200 BC and say 200 AD. Okay, and they were a very small local group, but there were poems written about them that are still danced to and recited to this
Wow.
day. And then there was a period of a couple of centuries where we don't hear much about the Cholas at all. And then starting from about 850 AD, what we call the Imperial Cholas
Hmm.
started their rise. Were the two sets of Cholas related? We have no idea. Okay.
Okay.
But they did occupy, their core land was the same around the Kaveri River Delta. But why do we even talk about these earlier Cholas? Why don't we just stick to the Imperial Cholas? Because the Imperial Cholas, in their genealogies, claim descent from these earlier Cholas. Whether they were really descended or whether they were kind of piggybacking onto their greatness and say, see, this is the great heritage that is part of our lineage, that I don't know,
Right.
because as you see in my book, the Cholas were masters of image creation and public
Yeah.
relations and all that. So this was definitely very much a part of that. So from 850 AD till about 1279 AD was the reign of what we call the Imperial Cholas. And Rajaraja Chola and his son Rajendra, I would say, were the two greatest emperors in that period. And their rule was from about 985 to about Rajendra, I don't know, 10 something or the other. So they were kind of in the middle of that. And
Got it.
yeah.
Got it. So, ma'am, when we talk about the Cholas, as you mentioned, they were like they knew why they needed trade at that time. They were good administrators, great warriors, obviously. They understood the importance of art and history, and we see architecture as well, the Brihadiswara Temple. Ma'am, when Rajaraja Chola comes into power, can you talk about how does he come into power? Because before he comes to the power, his elder brother is murdered. and
Yes.
there's still some confusion about who murdered him. Was it Rajaraja Chola himself or the enemies? So can you talk about that?
Yes, of course. So Rajaraja's rise to power is actually fascinating. So,
Yeah,
it was an empire that was built, they kind of clawed their way up to some sort of a position of power, his ancestors. And until that point, the Cholas had been very regional. So there's a river, very famous river in southern India called the Kaveri. In fact, they call it the Dakshin Ganga because they believe that the waters of the Ganga were brought by Agastya and, made into the Kaveri. That's part of their mythology. So when Rajaraja came to the throne, it was after a period of great instability. In fact, there's this movie called Poniyin Selvan that is
yeah,
making waves all over India that kind of expands on this period of instability and kind of makes a historical fiction out of it. So what happened then was Rajaraja Chola's father was ruling, and his Rajaraja's older brother was slated to become the next king. But then he was murdered. We don't know what happened, who murdered him. Some
yeah,
people say that the person who became the next king, who was Rajaraja's uncle, murdered him. Some say he was murdered by the Pandyas, who were furious because of their defeat at his hands. We do not know. So that's material that is ripe for storytelling, for fiction.
yeah,
But the fact is, after Rajaraja's father, Rajaraja's uncle became king, a man named Uttama Chola. And if you read the inscriptions, they're kind of very vague hints. There's a Kali Yugam brewing, and Rajaraja was this great man who stood behind and said, "No, no, you become the king. I'll wait for you." And so
right,
after Uttama Chola, it was not Uttama Chola's son who became the king, but Rajaraja himself. So the lineage zigzagged back and forth. How I wish we knew what happened. So we just have
right,
speculation, little hints here and there. And even the death of Rajaraja's older brother, it is not directly mentioned. We find out about it from an inscription that talks about the punishment meted out to his murderers, which was having their land taken away from them, and then somebody is buying that land. So in the most indirect way, you get mention of
right,
this murder. So Rajaraja had a long apprenticeship kind of under his father, although when his father was alive, it was mostly his brother who was the Yuvaraja, or the king, crown king, but he must have been watching what's going on.
yeah,
And then under his uncle for 15 years. So by the time he came to throne, he had seen a lot, and
yeah,
and he was an exceptional character, I think so.
got it.
Yeah.
So, ma'am, when Rajaraja Chola comes into power, what kind of society was there in place? I mean, I really want to, because I have this fascination with societies of the past. I don't know for what reason, but since my childhood, I have always wanted to know how the society shaped under a particular ruler. So can you talk about that? Because his administration was top notch, and you have written a very detailed chapter about his administration style. So can you go into the details about this?
Yes, of course. That's a very good question because, as I have mentioned earlier, the Cholas until Rajaraja were a very local group. Okay, so their
Yeah,
territory was their kind of a hereditary territory around the Kaveri basin. Now, Rajaraja pushed the boundaries beyond. Now, part of his empire were other, powers and clans and tribes and dynasties that had their own independence all this time. So now you're bringing it together under one crown, all these diverse people who worship differently, who are organized. So he needed to kind of create a sense of a unified organization. And he did that. That's why I said military conquest was not enough. So he did a lot of standardization. He conducted, so South India at that time, and even long before, was it was very agrarian. It was a collection of villages. So
yeah,
some villages had farmers in them. There were some villages with traders, commercial villages, some villages with the Brahmins. And these were not watertight connections. I mean, it was not like there was no connection at all. There was a lot of interaction between them, but that was how it was organized. And each one had its own sort of set of rules and its own committees
right,
and its own. But so Rajaraja was smart. He knew he could not dismantle that entirely because this was a hierarchy or setup that had been centuries in the making. So you can't come there with a sword and
yeah,
kind of dismantle all that. So he kind of maintained that. He gave power to the landlords who had been holding power hereditarily for many centuries. He allowed them to have that. He superimposed his own organization over that. So he created a new division called Awalanadu, which was, and he appointed people, in charge of that. He standardized land measurements. He standardized taxes. So over this whole messy mass, he attempted to impose some order, which could not have
Right.
been an easy thing to do. And he had to do it carefully. He couldn't kind of do it in a ruthless manner because he saw what happened. I mean, they were already, I mean, the borders of his kingdom were very unstable. There
Yeah.
would be revolts ready to break out at any time. So, so he imposed order, attempted in a very, very unstable situation. And I think that's part
Right.
of his genius, really. So,
Right. Ma'am, I really want to know because I come from Maharashtra. Okay, so
mhm,
for me, the inspiration since childhood, the stories which I have been told by my grandparents or in my school were of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj.
of course,
And
yeah.
when I read about Rajaraja Chola and when I read about Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, two great men, and both of them had vision that was beyond their years. I mean, they had futuristic vision. Rajaraja Chola brings in a great administration style. Same with Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. Both had their navies, and when we look at Indian history at a larger picture, the Mughals never had their navy, and they were such a
Yeah.
huge empire. How do you think Rajaraja Chola had this vision? I mean, it baffles me.
It's another very good question. I think he was keenly endowed with a sense of history. As I said, from the very beginning, from even the very early Cholas, there was
Hmm.
interaction. They were, even though they were a very local sort of clan as they were earlier on, it was not that they had these blinkers and they had no idea what was going on. So they were
Right,
very, very aware of a world outside their boundaries. And these were, and lots of their towns were on the coast. So it's not like the Mughals were very much in the interior with the coasts far away.
right,
So maritime trading had to be part of what they were about. And it was happening all the time, Jay, even from the Sangam Tamils, that is like 2000 years ago. You had people from the Greek world, the Roman world coming to southern India, trading. We have like lots of coins have been found from their roots.
right,
Historians from that part of the world have written about this. So Rajaraja surely inherited that memory, that cultural legacy. And somehow they found out, there was this intense trading war with Indonesia for the
yeah,
trading privileges with China. China is like so far away. How do you even know? But he had information. They had spies. They had information coming in, and he acted on it. He didn't just sit back and say, I'm like too busy fighting my inner wars. So, like
right,
you said, Shivaji was a visionary. So was Rajaraja, and he attacked Sri Lanka. Actually, he launched a
right,
pretty brutal raid on Sri Lanka. How did he know that this was the time to attack? Because a horse trader who was trading there came and spread the word that there was anarchy in Sri Lanka. There was a very weak ruler. The military was revolting. So based on that, he launched a brutal attack and he conquered a part of Sri Lanka.
yeah,
So yeah, he made use of all the information and his organization to expand his empire and
right,
participate in a world that was much larger than his own local world.
right. Would it be right to call Rajaraja Chola the first Imperial Chola?
Yes. So why do we say imperial? I mean, that's again, all these things are debated. Some people say, what do you mean by imperial? That's like a
Yeah,
Western notion
right,
that you
right,
think. But okay, he's been given that term. So it is something that uh, he did have, I feel, a vision of an empire. Okay, so he had all these wars, he expanded, he pushed, and then he didn't just sit back and say, okay, I've conquered my enemies, I've sought revenge and obtained
right,
revenge. That was not enough, so he went beyond, right? So we just talked about the trade. He tried to negotiate a trade deal with China, and in fact he sent a trade mission over there to kind of negotiate something.
right,
He built this amazing temple, which maybe we'll get to talk about, which was not merely a place of worship, but it had a huge symbolic importance in you kind of unifying, providing a unifying symbol for his empire. Then we talked about the organization, how he tried to standardize, the measurements and the taxes. He did a huge land survey to know exactly what was there. These are not just the actions of a man who's just intent on fighting and nothing more.
Right.
So I think he deserves that label, because it was much
Right.
more than just a fighting man.
Yeah, because after him we also see Rajendra Chola. So Cholas had an ally in I think so the Cambodian Empire, Angkor
Yes,
Wat,
yes,
and they Rajendra Chola attacks Srivijaya when they are having their struggles. So
correct.
uh, that's why I wanted to ask, because it's very confusing who went out first, because today when we see there's like examples of Ramayana in Angkor Wat, if I'm not wrong, there are temples as well.
Oh,
And
yes,
talking about the temples, you just mentioned Brihadiswara Temple, I think so.
yes. Hmm.
So I have never been to Brihadiswara, but I've seen it in pictures, and my mother has actually gone there.
Oh, wow.
Um,
Okay.
and in her words, she told me that the architecture is just fantastic. You cannot even imagine someone making those kinds of temples long back. And especially when you go to the temple, you can see, I think so, the top part is called Vimana.
Yes.
And
Mhm.
there's a huge stone at the top. I think so, spherical stone or something like that,
Yes. Hmm.
which is impossible to take to that height. So how did they do
Yes.
that?
Oh, I wish I could answer. And please, I hope that one day you get to visit Brihadishwara, because
Yeah,
no photo or video will do it justice. So there
right,
you're right. And the whole temple at that time, it was the biggest temple in all of India, they say. So, and again, here is an example of Rajaraja's vision. Okay, until that point, the Cholas was that whole region was a land of temples. Most of them, many of them, devoted to Shiva, and they were small little stone temples. Earlier, they were made out of brick, which is a very unstable material. It kind of collapses easily. So several of the Chola kings invested, the earlier Chola kings invested time and money on renovating those temples to make them more
right,
permanent into stone. But they were just small things. Now here along comes Rajaraja and builds something the likes of which has never been seen before. Like, where does he even get this idea? Like, he could have just
yeah,
built one more temple. But you're right, the Vimana, which is like the tower over the Garbhagraha or the Sanctum Sanctorum, is over 200 feet tall. Amazing. And there is no, it is all like what they call hammer dress. They're like blocks of granite that are just sitting on top of each other. And the weight of those things is what is keeping the structure stable. There is no
right,
stucco, there is no cement, nothing like that. And the stone on top, it's actually not one stone as was thought earlier, but a bunch of them kind of
okay,
glued together. But even then, it's tons and
yeah,
tons of granite. How was it brought up? There's a theory that there was a ramp that was constructed from a village 6 kilometers away, and this was kind of brought up that ramp. Even the granite from which the temple was made is not a local product. It was brought from somewhere else, probably by bullock cart, probably by boats down the Kaveri. So there's so much we don't know.
yeah,
And the most interesting thing is the temple itself was built in a place with no prior religious association. Most other villages in Chola lands had a previous religious history. There were saints who had come there and sung about it, about a particular place, and a temple came up there. Tanjavur was a blank slate as far as religious association was concerned. So he built his temple there, and in a way, it was like now if one group of people can't say, oh, this is my native place, and see this, he's built it in my place. It was equally
oh, okay,
something
yeah,
or nothing to everybody. So that again was a sign of his vision. He, like, it was a blank slate, and the whole empire was involved in keeping it running. He got everyone
right,
invested into it. But architecturally, it is amazing. And the other thing is, he inscribed on the wall. So a lot of what we
right.
know about Rajaraja are from the temple inscriptions. Mm.
Right. Ma'am, since we are talking about temples and you touched upon the topic of religion,
Yes.
you might be knowing about the controversy that happened after the film came out.
Yes.
Firstly, the controversy, and then Kamal Hassan comes out and he says something like Hinduism was not their so to say the major
Yeah.
religion. It was Shaivism, Vaishnavism, stuff like that. What is your take on that? Were the Cholas Hindus, Shaivites? Like, what is it? Because the controversy in media, it's, I don't know how do they make out their points or anything, but to give a specific answer to our audience, what would you say?
My answer is the whole controversy is stupid. I'm sorry to use the word, but it is such a non-issue. It's I feel they're bringing like modern sensibilities, modern political agendas, all that
Yeah,
into something that makes no difference. Yes, they were Hindu. Okay, you may not define it this way, but I really think it's irrelevant. I really think this is something that is there is no
yeah,
point in debating. And yes, they were Hindu, but they fought against other Hindus. Okay, they raped other Hindus, they plundered. So
yeah,
it's like you can't slot this thing into a neat narrative and then try to prove a point. So I was just reading this and saying, well, what are you trying to say? What is the point in this? It's like two children in a schoolyard just beating each other
yeah.
up and then insulting each other. And then you think back and say, we should be a little more grown up than this, a little more intelligent than this. So I feel
Right.
all sides were kind of in the wrong in this. It's a debate that is not a debate. It's a non-debate as far
Right.
as I'm concerned. So.
This reminds me. I was doing this one podcast with Mr. Virendra Singh Rathore. He's a historian who talks about Rajput history. Has written books about Rajputs and Prithviraj Chauhan
Mm-hmm,
especially. And
mm-hmm.
he used this one line when I was talking to him, which was, "You cannot see history from the modern world's lens, because the mindset at that time and the mindset today is completely different. At that time, probably destroying temples, multiple marriages, and destroying the societal life was okay. It's not okay today. So you cannot compare and you cannot see the same, see it from the same lens. So
I agree completely. I really do agree because it's not fair to them. And God
yeah,
knows how our history today is going to be judged. You need to
absolutely.
understand that's the importance of history. If you say what lessons are you going to learn from history, like if you start imposing like modern mindsets, it's everybody is a villain. That's history
Hmm.
around the world was fought that way. It was just the world was very unstable. Everything was in flux. So how do you consolidate power? So really, he's Mr. Rathore is absolutely correct. You cannot put a modern mindset. It's not fair.
Right.
It's just gets a very distorted view of history. We learn nothing from it, and we become even more narrow-minded. I think history is
Yeah.
supposed to kind of open our minds, and it's
Yeah.
a wonderful thing. Look at the odds against which he did that. You admire the man, but you also be clear-sighted about what he did. He is not a
Right.
saint. To make him a saint is like to really reduce the whole thing to something that it's not fair to him.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. You kind of bring in mythology when you start talking about such things, because then probably the generation 500 years from now, they'll think what kind of stupid people these people were in our present generation. But talking about something else, ma'am, since you have written about Rajaraja Chola, you have also written about the people before him, the people after him. You have written about the decline as well of the Chola Empire. You also talk. You have a particular blog where you talk about South India. And I was listening to one of your other podcasts that you did. Um, you have fantastic points about the Chola Empire. I really want to know, while you were researching for the book, what were the things which were, you were like, okay, I never saw this coming, stuff like that.
Oh, wow, that's a great question. So I started on a blank slate, really. So a lot of it was an amazing surprise. Like you said, we were not taught much about it in
Yeah.
school. You knew a few odd facts, and that Poniyin Selvan. Actually, I have not read the thing, but so there's a lot of misinformation
Hmm.
also there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So a lot of it was like, wow. So one of the most amazing things I saw was their inscriptions, how they seem to have a very keen sense of recording their history and
Right.
recording a particular version of their history. So that's why I said much earlier on that there were masterminds at public relations, at image creation. I didn't realize that. So I whether as I said, they came up in very unstable times. They were conquering territories that were not part of theirs. They needed to incorporate a lot of hostile tribes into their empire. So one way of kind of validating that and telling people, look, you're part of this grand thing, is to tell mythological stories, to say that
Right.
you're part of this mythology. I found that very interesting, and you can't take it at face value. Then you would say it's kind of stupid, but you see why they're telling these stories, and you say, wow, that's smart.
Yeah.
You look at any corporation today and look at their PR campaign or their marketing campaign. You it's a way of kind of opening your eyes and making you personally look at things a certain way. So I was fascinated by that. I was fascinated by the inscriptions, how everything was recorded in meticulous detail. So they've
Right.
left us a record of their times. So to think like that, you think, okay, they're just busy fighting and it's all this just squabbling, but no, I mean, they were uh, I think a modern business school can learn a lot from how they
Wow.
thought and organized themselves. So that was a really pleasant surprise. And
Right.
also that you think of, okay, Cholas from the Kaveri Delta realize that they're part of a bigger world. They were very aware of a world well beyond their borders, and what they did to try and be a part of that. All those were wonderful surprises.
Yeah. In fact, they go on to become the Indian Ocean region's hegemonic empire, because from Kaveri Delta at one point they were on the decline, and from there to a hegemon, it's like really baffling.
Yes, yes. But if you
Uh,
read the book, you'll see the progression of how it happened. So
right. And ma'am, also you talked about inscriptions right now, and when we look at Indian history, it has always been said that Indian history has a tradition of oral history. So when I read about this, I was again baffled, because before that I always knew, okay, there were some inscriptions, but not in such details as the Cholas had done. So where does this come from?
well, the Cholas are not unique in inscribing. So it has been all, you'll see temples all over that have
Yeah,
inscriptions that inscribe like military victories. And the temple walls were like public records offices where you inscribe stuff. So it's not that
got it.
it came up in a vacuum. I think what the Cholas did was in different, exceptional in two ways. One is the sheer number of inscriptions, a volume of inscriptions. They say
Hmm.
Chola inscriptions outnumber anything else in the south. I'm sorry, I don't know
Yeah,
that much about the north, so I will not presume to talk about that. And the other thing that Rajaraja in particular did was, yes, these inscriptions are full of hyperbole. It's like you're boasting, you're trying to present yourself as, something. You can't take those inscriptions at face value. You
right,
have to, take it with a pinch of salt. But Rajaraja standardized some of his inscriptions. He introduced a section called the Maikirti, where it's a chronological list of his achievements. So it'll start with this saying, I, Rajaraja, who did this, who did this, who
hmm,
did this, who did this. So that is kind of factual. Of course, there'll be some things. And then you go on to the business of the inscription, which is a certain land grant or a
right,
tax code or something like that. So those are invaluable in learning about the person. So, and that kind of make it the section eulogizing the empire, or listing the emperor's achievements, was followed by Rajaraja's successors too.
right.
So the Cholas did it in both in a bigger fashion. They were larger than life in so many areas. So in both in sheer number and also the quality of it, I would say is better. So
Good. Ma'am, and talking about the book, what was the research process like? Because I'm sure the research was not easy for this book, because there's so much at different places. So, what was the research process like for this book?
you said it. There's so much. So I spent almost 1 year just kind of in a panic. Like, where do I go? Where do I begin? So again, I had some very pleasant surprises in the course of my research. So my first foundation stone was a book called The Cholas by this great historian called Neelakanta Shastri. This book is nearly about 80 or 90 years old. So that was from that. But it is a remarkable book that covers every aspect of Cholas. And then there are lots of specialized works, people who are specialized in writing about Chola bronzes. People has gone dive deep into Brihadiswara Temple. People have written specifically about the maritime trade, written specifically about Chola organization, etc., etc. So those are very academic works meant for scholars who are specialized in that particular area. So I read all that, and then try to kind of bring it together into something that somebody like you or me could kind of make sense of. But the most pleasant surprise was there's something called the Epigraphia Indica. These are tens and dozens of volumes of texts that are produced by the Archaeological Survey of India, that started sometime in the late 1800s, when the field of Indian epigraphy was coming, into its own. So people would, when they saw the inscriptions initially, they didn't know what these were saying. So there were scholars who would go there, painstakingly make rubbings of all those inscriptions, then come down and then write them down, translate them, transliterate them. Many of this is in English, actually. So because my Tamil, I can't read that level of Tamil. And then done an analysis of all of them. And this is digitized, available for absolutely free online. There's a site called archive.org. You just go in there and look at epigraphy. All the inscriptions are there. It's very, very painful because most of it is like so and so endowed to so many sheep to this temple, they endowed so many lamps, they gave this. But you kind of wade through that, and you kind of eventually you come out for air, and then you see a bigger picture. And you say, wow, so the research was not easy. I went down many, 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 many rabbit holes, because you see this and you say, oh, that. And then many of them go nowhere. Some of them went somewhere. But it was painful but rewarding, I guess.
Nice. So, to anyone who is listening or watching to this episode, I would highly recommend you to read this book, because this was, in fact, I made a post today on my Instagram, which was about the best books that I read in 2022 about Indian history. And this was definitely one of those, like one of my top 12. And the reason is the research, as you said, it was fantastic. And the detail and the whole story of the Cholas, it's inspiring. And for some reason, as Indians, we have forgotten about this empire. We still remember the Mughals, or we basically remember only the North Indian history. I'm sorry to say that. So it's important to go back to our roots and to even get inspired by empires like these, because this was not a small empire. This was a huge, huge empire, and they have done so much for the nation. So yeah, that's for today's episode.
Thank you so much, Jay. It has been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for joining in. And for those who want to read this book, I'll link the link of this book in my bio. You can go buy this book from Amazon, Flipkart, or any nearest store to you. So yeah, thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much for doing this episode.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good evening. Thank you.
Same to you, ma'am. Yeah.